begin? Okay. Bismillah walhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm going to do my best to fill in for Imam Majid in continuing the Ihya al-Umuddin Kitab Dhammul Ghurur, the book on the sort of the avoiding, right, deception. Ghurur is to be deceived or to see something the way it really is not, right? So Allah says in the Quran, وَلَا يُغُرَّنَّكُمْ بِاللَّهِ الْغَرُورِ. Do not let the deceiver deceive you. And the deceiver, is one of the names of shaitan is al-ghurur, right? And so deception is something that is to be avoided. The believer should always see things the way they really are. Allahumma arini ashya kama hi. Show me things the way they really are. And so deception in general is never the quality of the believer. The only place where it is allowed is in war, right? Al-harbu khuda', the Prophet Muhammad says, war is deception. But other than that, there's no place for it. There's no place for it in transactions, like bay'u al-gharar, transactions where you think you're buying A, but you're really not buying A. That's haram, right? And there's no place for it in spirituality. And that's the part where Imam Ghazali is focusing on here. This is towards the end of Kitab Dhamm al-Ghurur. And this section is broken up into different sections in terms of how Muslims, especially people of knowledge and people who are studying and trying to learn, how they can be self-deluded, how they can be delusional or deceive themselves in terms of their own piety, right? So they think that they're pious, but in reality, they're not. So that's where we are in the book. And again, this is part of a bigger section of books called Rub'ul Muhlikat, the things that destroy you. So previously he talked about riyah, he talked about jah, he talked about seeking fame, attention, wealth, dunya, lusts, all these things destroy you. So this is the completion of the things that destroy you, because this is the last part in this book, which is a part of the bigger set of books of Ihya al-Umuddin. So let's begin. غرور العلماء الكلام والمجادلة. This section is about how scholars of theology, people who debate the nuances of who God is, not the basic principles, la ilaha illallah, the nuanced, tiny details. That's kind of what ilm al-kalam is. Ilm al-kalam is the science of theology, but when Ghazali in the 12th century, 11th century is talking about it, he's talking about all these different subsects and different groups who have broken off into their own little sects because they have their own little nuanced beliefs about Allah, about His names, about His attributes, etc., etc. How they are self-deceived because they think they're on the truth, and because they think debating one another is the way to get there. So it's really it's also a section on the blameworthiness of wanting to debate people. That's what the section is a bigger part of. And man, if your YouTube feeds are like mine, there's a lot of just kind of paraphernalia of just debate out there, right? Muslims debating one another, Muslims debating Christians, Muslims debating Muslims. It's like debate is kind of clickbait nowadays. And so I think it is relevant from social media point of view as well. So he says, this group of people اشتغلوا بعلم الكلام والمجادلة في الأهواء والرد على المخالفين وتتبع مناقضاتهم. This is a group of people who they busy themselves with the study of theology and rebuting people who don't believe what they believe. واستكثروا من معرفة المقالات المختلفة واشتغلوا بتعلم طرق في مناظرة أولئك وإفحامهم. And they spend all their time figuring out how to win debates, how to beat the other person in a debate, and how to convince these other groups of people, subgroups of Muslims who are just kind of different sects, to believe what they believe. Remember, he's going to talk about how these scholars who spend all their time doing this, they're self-deluded in terms of their piety. وافترقوا في ذلك فرقا كثيرة واعتقدوا أنه لا يكون لعبد عمل إلا بإيمان ولا يصح إيمان إلا بأن يتعلم جدلهم وما سموه أدلة عقائدهم. And they believe you have no action unless you have iman, and you have no iman unless you believe what they believe, and you can't believe what they believe unless you follow the particular nuanced tools and steps of belief that they have to show, right? Remember, just pause real quick. A lot of this sounds technical, right? You know who Imam Ghazali wrote this book for? You know who the intended audience was? Imam Ghazali wrote this book for the scholars of his time. Imam Ghazali was a scholar. And part of what he was concerned about was the scholars of his time not understanding what scholarship was all about, right? And so part of why sometimes it sounds confusing is he's assuming you have this background knowledge, you, the reader of this book. But we're going to try to break it down as simple as possible. But yeah, they basically say, if you don't believe what we believe, you have no action, you have no iman, right? And these are people who want to argue and debate all the time, right? So basically, وَظَنُّوا أَنَّهُ لا أحد أعرف بالله وبصفاته منهم وأنه لا إيمان لمن لم يعتقد مذهبهم. No one knows God better than they do, and no one has faith unless they believe what they believe. ولم يتعلم علمهم ودعت كل فرقة منهم إلى نفسها وهم فريقتان. And basically, these are two basic groups. If we want to summarize it, we can say there are two basic groups. One, ضال, they're misguided. And number two, muhiqqa, and they're guided. They're on the truth. One group is debating falsehood. They're trying to defend falsehood. They're trying to defend points of views that are not correct. And another group, they're defending points of views that are correct. But then watch what he says about both these groups. فَالضَّالَةُ, as for the group that is defending points of views, and they're arguing all the time about points of views that are incorrect, هِيَ الَّتِي تَدْعُ إِلَى غَيْرِ سُنَّةٍ. They're the groups that call to other than the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's self-explanatory, right? وَالْمُحِقَّةِ هِيَ الَّتِي تَدْعُ إِلَى السُنَّةِ. The group that is on the truth, they're the group that calls towards the sunnah. وَالْغُرُورِ, listen to this. وَالْغُرُورِ شَامِلٌ لِجَمِيعِهِمْ. And delusion encompasses both of them. You see what he just said? Two basic groups of Muslims when it comes to debating, especially theology. But two basic groups. One group is on the truth. They're debating truthful content. The other group is debating false content. And they're both deluded. Now, how is that? You would think he would say one group is deluded, the other isn't. But he says they're both deluded, right? They're both delusional. They're both deceived. How is that? أَمَّا الضَّالَةِ. As for the group that is inviting to other than the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and they're misguided. فغفلتها عن ضلالها وظنها بنفسها النجاة وهم فرق كثيرة يكفر بعضهم بعضا. They're deluded because they think they're on the truth, but they're really not. And all of them, one another, they excommunicate each other from Islam. So we'll leave it at that. But the main reason is لم تحكم أولا شروط الأدلة ومنهاجها فرأى أحدهم الشبهة دليلا ودليل شبهة. The reason is, part of why they just keep wanting to debate one another. Part of what he says, they don't even understand each other's point of views. Not only that, but their usul is incorrect. They think something is a proof when it was extracted incorrectly, and they think something is not a proof when it was extracted correctly. That's the difference between dalil and shubha. So this is an usul al-fiqh thing. A dalil is an extraction of a verse or a hadith that dalla yadullu leads you to a correct belief or action. A shubha is an extraction of a verse or a hadith that leads you to the incorrect conclusion because you didn't extract it correctly. Let me give you an example. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا إذا قضيت الصلاة فانتشروا no wait يا أيها الذين آمنوا إذا نودي للصلاة لليوم الجمعة فاسعوا إلى ذكر الله وذروا البيع. O you who believe, when the call to prayer is made on Friday, hurry to the remembrance of Allah. Now the verb hurry is a command form. Hurry. So can we say from that, can we make a dalil from that, that hurrying to the remembrance of Allah, going to the Friday prayer is an obligation? Because Allah used a verb that indicates obligation. Is that an appropriate dalil? Okay. So we'll say that that's a dalil. But what if the next verse, فَإِذَا قُضِيَتِ الصَّلَاةِ فَانْتَشِرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ وَابْتَغُوا مِنْ فَضْلِ اللَّهِ. But when prayer is finished, spread out to the earth, command form, spread out, the verb is a command form, and go to work. وَابْتَغُوا مِنْ فَضْلِ اللَّهِ. Seek God's bounty, go to work. So is it a command, is it an obligation after Jummah to go to work? Is it an obligation? The verb is a command form. The verb is a command form to go to work. After Jummah, go seek God's bounty, right? That's a command form of a verb. So you're obligated to go to work after Jummah, correct? Incorrect. But they're both what? The obligatory forms of verbs, verbal commands. So why is this one truly a command, an obligation, but this one, to go to work after Jummah, actually, it's optional? How do you know? Well, you have to understand usulul fiqh, and why some verbs, okay, they indicate a command to really do something, obligation, but other verbs in a command form, they actually mean optionality. How do you know the difference? You have to study usulul fiqh. That's what Imam Shafi'i's Risala was all about. He was concerned because Islam was spreading through all different countries and areas where people didn't speak Arabic, and he realized people are misunderstanding how to extract what to believe, what to do from the Quran and Sunnah. So he wrote his book called the Risala, which laid the foundations of Usulul Fiqh. And it was very focused on understanding Arabic. But basically this is what Imam Ghazali is saying. A lot of these groups, they just want to debate each other. They want to go on YouTube, they want to have all these debates with one another. They don't even understand what each other's points of view are because they don't understand the difference between a dalil and a shubha. A shubha is basically for me to say, oh, see this verse, it says you have to go to work after Jummah. No, that is a mischaracterization. It's called a shubha. I misunderstood it. I confused it. Okay? A dalil is to say it is wajib to go to Jummah based on the verse. So they confuse dalil and shubha. That's what Imam Ghazali is saying. And so it's really an issue of usulul fiqh. Anyway, that was all the group that is misguided to begin with. What about the group that was debating for truthful reasons? أما الفرقة المحقة فإنما اغترارها من حيث إنها ظنت بالجدل أنه أهم الأمور وأفضل القربات في دين الله. Their deception, they're being deluded. Remember, this is the section on not being deluded as a Muslim, not being deceived. Their self-deception is in the fact that they think argumentation is the closest way to get to God. Not the fact that they're debating or holding up correct points of view. It's the fact that they think that argumentation is the best way to get close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by debating the points of view that truly are the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The issue is argumentation, right? That's what he's going to get to. So he says, وَزَعَمَتْ أَنَّهُ لَا يَتِمُ لِأَحَدٍ دِينُهُ مَا لَمْ يَفْحَصْ وَيَبْحَثْ. If someone does not go into the details of why they believe what they believe to the very nuanced, and they're not able to argue it, they don't really have iman. That's what these other people who Imam Ghazali says these are self-deceived, that's what they believe. وَأَنَّ مَنْ صَدَقَ اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ مِنْ غَيْرِ بَحْثٍ وَتَحْرِيرِ دَلِيلِ فَلَيْسَ بِمُؤْمِنٍ. And anyone who doesn't investigate from an argumentative point of view, rational, sort of like logical point of view, why they believe what they believe, and they can't argue it, okay, they're not really a believer. أو ليس بكامل الإيمان, or they don't have full belief. ولا مقرب عند الله. فلهذا الظن فاسد قطعت أعمارها في تعلم الجدل والبحث عن المقالات وهذيانات المبتدعة ومناقاتهم. And in this way they spend their whole life wasting their life debating innovators and people who are misguided, constantly trying to use argumentation to bring them to the truth. They waste their whole life doing this. This reminds me of the story of Rumi in Rumi's Mathnawi, where this very, very simple man gets on a boat with a scholar. He's a grammarian. And they go out to the sea for like a fishing expedition. And the grammarian, he's very sort of like boastful about his knowledge, and he starts asking this other guy who got on the boat, he says, what do you know about nahu? What do you know about sarf? What do you know about balagha? What do you know about grammar and all these things? And the man's like, I don't really know much about grammar. And the other guy was like, man, you've wasted your whole life. You've wasted half your life. This is where life is. It's in knowing all these things. The other guy was like, okay. And then, the tide kind of changes. The sea gets kind of aggressive. There's a storm. It looks like the boat is about to capsize. And so the other guy asked the scholar, he says, what do you know about swimming? And the other guy says, I don't know much. He said, you're about to lose your entire life. And so the point of that story is, this other guy, he spent his whole life arguing and debating, right? And, focused on details. But he missed the big picture. The big picture of the one thing that could save your life, which is just to learn how to swim. Very basic thing. And a lot of Muslims who are in the debate scene, they're all caught up in arguing this fine point of an attribute of Allah, or this fine point of an attribute of Allah, or this technical point. Now we'll talk about just a couple examples between the Mu'tazilites and the Asharites and the Maturidis. And they spend so much time, but they miss the big picture of just like how to be an insan, how to be a human, which is what Islam was all about, which is like how to swim. Like that, that's the first thing to learn, is character, akhlaq, right? Elsewhere, who was it? Imam Malik, he said, al-adab qabla al-ilm. You have to have etiquette before you have knowledge. You won't know what to do with the knowledge if you don't have etiquette, right? And Rumi says elsewhere in his Mathnawi, he says, as Khuda khahim tawfiq adab, bi adab mahrum gozash as lutf rab. We ask Allah for tawfiq, for adab. Because without adab, you will be mahrum, you will be prevented from the grace of God. And part of the issue with these people who want to debate so much is they have no adab. They have no adab. That's actually something else. So in Kitabul Ilm, Imam Ghazali, and another one of, I think it's Kitabul Ilm, if I'm not mistaken, he has Adabul Jidal, the etiquettes of argumentation. There's like 8 points. Etiquette, if you want to debate with someone or you got to argue with someone, if you want to do it according to the Sunnah, you got to follow 8 points. Number 1, you don't spend time debating with people if you yourself have not taken care of all of your obligations. If you are not praying 5 times a day, and you're not fasting in Ramadan, you haven't gone to Hajj, and you're not making preparations for it, and you're not, fasting in Ramadan or paying your zakat, if you're not doing the basic obligations, you have no business spending extra time debating people. Imam Ghazali gives the example of a tailor who's like making a bunch of clothes for money, and he says, I'm doing this so people can cover themselves when they pray. It's a pious thing. But he himself doesn't pray. Like, well, you need to take care of your own prayer first before you... And so the first thing is, before you get into argumentation, take care of your own obligations. The second thing is, if there's a community obligation that has precedent, deal with that first before trying to debate with other people. Here you are debating about fine points of Allah's names and attributes, and Palestinians are suffering. Spend your time doing some lobbying for brothers and sisters in Palestine. That's way more important than debating nuanced things right now. So that's number 2. When there's a priority in the community, you focus on the priority. You don't focus on debate, things related to debate. Number 3, the point of debate is to arrive at truth, not to establish a point of view. And so you might be Shafi'i or Hanafi or Hanbali or whatever. The point of debate is not to establish the Shafi'i point of view. The point of debating is to arrive at the truth. And so if you arrive at the truth, you win, regardless of whether that was your point of view or not. He says you have to have that as adab when you come into a debate. Number 4, he says, and I don't think I can remember all of them, but if you want to debate with someone, debate in private should be more beloved to you than debate in public. Try that. The next time someone wants to have a debate, say, okay, I'll debate you, but only in private where no one else can see. You think they still want to do it? No, probably not. Because part of it is the fame that comes with, winning, right? He's going to talk about that. But that's another part of the adab of debate and argumentation is you should want to do it in private before you do it in public. Another point he says, you should only want to debate with people who know more than you. A lot of times people want to get into debates with people who know less than them because they know they'll win. Because it's about winning. And they think that winning is what? Is overcoming and overwhelming the other person, kind of like an MMA match. But no, Imam Shafi'i used to say, I never debated someone except that I asked Allah to put the truth on their tongue so I could find it. Right? That's part of the adab of debate. Right? And so, that's the other thing. You should want to find truth like someone who's lost their camel and wants to find their camel. Yes? Well, whatever the subject of the debate is, right? So it could be a lot of different things. But, his point is that some people just want to win the debate. They don't want to arrive at the truth. They just want to establish their point of view. They don't want to establish the truth. And so these are different aspects of adabul jidal. It's in another section of Ihya Ulumuddin. I just went off on a tangent because he didn't bring it here, but that's basically what he's getting at, right? He's saying, they spent their whole life learning how to debate, techniques of logic, all these different things, so they could just keep winning debate. But they forgot there's an etiquette to debate to begin with, right? So anyway, وَأَحَدُهُمْ يَظُنُّ أن اشتغاله بالجدل أولى وأقرب عند الله وأفضل ولكنه لالتذاذه بالغلبة والإفحام واللذة الرياسة وعز الانتماء. They would have you believe that the reason they need to win the debate is because this raises the word of Allah, it makes them closer to Allah. In reality, what they want is, it's an interesting terminology he says here. He says, iltidad bil ghalaba. You know what that means? You know how in jiu-jitsu you submit people? It's like submissions, like in MMA, mixed martial arts, there's submissions. It's like when you submit someone, they tap out. I'm out, you win. That's iltidad bil ghalaba. They want to taste that sweetness of submitting someone. That's what they want. That's what these debaters want. They just want to taste the sweetness of submitting someone. You see how I know more than you? It's like now, MMA, you do it with your body, but back then they would do it with their brains, right? And so you had submission. Okay, and they want people to follow them, right? And they want to feel that sweetness of, sort of like overcoming someone in a debate. Actually, in the Dawah scene, there honestly is some overlap between MMA and people really into Dawah. There is some overlap. People who are into those things. It's kind of interesting. But anyway, they would do that at the expense of taking the person away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وعميت بصيرته فلم يلتفت إلى القرن الأول. And they're blinded. They don't even look at the original generation of the Prophet Muhammad صلى الله عليه وسلم. فإن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم شهد لهم بأنهم خير الحق. The Prophet said that the first generation is the best creation. وأنهم قد أدركوا كثيرا من الأهل البدع والهوى. And the Salaf, the Sahaba, they knew who the innovators were and the people who were misguided and all these things, right? They knew who these people were. And فما جعلوا أعمارهم ودينهم غرضا للخصومات والمجادلات وما اشتغلوا بذلك عن تفقد قلوبهم وجوارحهم وأحوالهم. But they didn't spend their lives and their time and their effort and their energy to try and debate these people. Even though the Sahaba, they knew more about Islam than anyone else, and they knew who the misguided people were. But the Sahaba never went around debating. They didn't, right? So he says, بل لم يتكلموا فيه إلا من حيث رأوا حاجة وتوسموا مخايل القلوب. They only did it to the bare minimum and only in places where they felt like it was necessary and they saw Allah's acceptance in it. But bare minimum, like salt on food. Like salt on food, right? فذكروا بقدر الحاجة ما يدل الضال على ضلالته. Just enough to tell the misguided person where their misguidance is. وإذا رأوا مصرا على ضلالته هجروه وأعرضوا عنه وأبغضوه في الله ولم يلزموا الملاحات معه طول العمر. But if they noticed after informing someone, hey, this is incorrect, hey, with adab, this isn't the correct belief, this isn't the right way to do something, this sect is misguided, stay away from it. After telling someone, if they noticed that that person insisted and persisted in that misguidance, they would just avoid them. And they would avoid them for the sake of Allah. That's it. They wouldn't spend their time trying to debate them. بل قالوا إن الحق هو الدعوة إلى السنة. And they would say, the truth is inviting to the sunnah, ومن السنة ترك الجدل في الدعوة إلى السنة. And the truth is inviting to the sunnah, and it's the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad to avoid debating people to try and invite them to the sunnah. Let me say that again. They knew that the truth is inviting to the sunnah, but they also knew that it's the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad to avoid argumentation. To avoid using argumentation just to invite people to sunnah. Right? Inviting to sunnah is done with adab, and it's done gracefully, and it's done like an invitation. It's not done through a debate and through argumentation. Right? ادعوا إلى سبيل ربك بالحكمة والموعظة الحسنة وجادلهم بالتي هي أحسن. Allah says in the Quran, call to the way of God. Call to the way of Allah. ادعوا إلى سبيل, with wisdom and with beautiful practice and preach, beautiful practice and preaching. And if you are going to argue, do it in the best of ways, which is exactly how Imam Ghazali is laying it out here, right? So then he says, إذ روي أبو أمامة الباهلي عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم, hadith from Abu Umama, that he says, the Prophet Muhammad صلى الله عليه وسلم أنه قال ما ضل قوم, no people are misguided قط بعد هدى كانوا عليه, after they had already been guided, إلا أوتوا الجدل, except that they learned how to argue. And learning how to argue caused them to become misguided. وكان الناس أكثر شيء جدلا. In the Quran, Allah says the thing that people do most is just argue. Right? The thing they do most is just argue. So he says, وَخَرَجَ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وسلم يَوْمًا عَلَى أَصْحَابِهِ. And one day he came out to the Sahaba, the Prophet Muhammad صلى الله عليه وسلم, وَهُمْ يَتَجَادَلُونَ وَيَخْتَصِمُونَ. And they were arguing with one another, right? Sort of intensely, right? فَغَضَبَ عَلَيْهِمْ حَتَّى كَأَنَّهُ فُقِئَ فِي وَجْهِهِ حَبَّ الرَّمَانِ مِنَ الْغَضَبِ. And they looked at the Prophet Muhammad, and it looked like his face got red, and they described it like someone who had been slapped with a bag of pomegranate seeds. Now, I've never seen a bag of pomegranate seeds slapped, but I'm sure they saw it and they knew what it looked like. And so they said, basically they were saying the Prophet Muhammad's face got red. He was so angry because he saw what? He saw the companions arguing. Arguing, right? And they were arguing with one another using verses of the Quran. Right? So the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, أَلِهَذَا بُعِثْتُمْ? Is this why you were sent to, like, meaning as the best of people for mankind? أَلِهَذَا بُعِثْتُمْ أَبِهَذَا أُمِرْتُمْ? Is this what you were commanded to do? Right? أَن تَضْرِبُوا كِتَابَ اللَّهِ بَعْضَهُ بِبَعْضٍ? That you hit one another with the book of Allah, metaphorically speaking. They weren't taking the Quran and hitting each other. Metaphorically speaking, taking verses of the Quran like a hammer and trying to hammer someone into submission into your point of view. Right? It never works. Isn't there there's like Aesop's, one of Aesop's fables. I just remember this from school. But like one day, the sun and the wind got into an argument because there was a guy wearing a jacket. It's one of these fables, like Aesop's fables. The sun and the wind get into an argument because there was a guy wearing a jacket. And the wind told the sun, I bet I can get this guy to take off his jacket before you can. I'm so powerful, I can blow it off of him. And so the sun said, okay, let's do it. So the wind blew, and it blew, and it blew, and it blew. And every time the wind blew, the guy did what? He held on tighter to his jacket, right? And then the sun said, okay, it's my turn. And then the sun just revealed itself. And the man said, what? Oh, it's kind of hot. Let me take off my jacket, right? And so that fable, it's a fable. But the moral of the story is when you try to force someone to do something, they tend to hold on even tighter to what they have, right? But if you just expose the beauty of what you have, then they'll accept it. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, this is how he was. He wouldn't debate people. He would just expose the beauty of the Quran. Walid ibn Mughira one time was sent by the Quraysh to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ to offer him some optionality, kind of debate him. And, just to be like, you might be sick, we'll get you a doctor. Do you want women? We'll get you the best women. Do you want money? We'll make you a king. What do you want? And he was just kind of throwing these different, and the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, are you done? Afaraqt? Are you done? And he said, yes. You think he used Platonian logic or the Socratic method, or this or that to convince Walid ibn Mughira that Islam is true? What do you think the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said? Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Hamim. Surah Fussilat. تنزيل من الرحمن الرحيم كتاب فصلت آياته قرآنا عربيا, all the way to the second page, right? Walid ibn Mughira was just taken aback, and he kind of leaned back as the Prophet was reciting, and he went back to the Quraysh, and he said, no one knows poetry better than I do amongst you Arabs. That was not poetry. He said, Wallahi, inna lahu la halawa. There's a sweetness in what he just recited. Wa inna alayhi la talawa. And it's upon some kind of beauty. Wa inna a'lahu muthmir. And it has, the peaks of it has fruits, right? And wa inna asfalahu la mughdiq. And the basis of it is soaked, which is a metaphor for saying it's rich with meaning, right? وَإِنَّهُ لَا يَعْلُ وَلَا يُعْلَى عَلَيْهِ. And this thing will rise and nothing will come above it. That's what Walid ibn Mughira said. After the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ did what? Debated him? No. Just exposed the truth of what was there. Right? And this was the way of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. So the Prophet, he goes out to the Sahaba arguing, and he's upset. His face is red. Is this why you were sent? Is this what I was teaching you? That you would use the book of Allah to hit one another, literally pound one another into submission. انظروا إلى ما أمرتم به فاعملوا وما نهيتم عنه فانتهوا. Just look to what I told you to do and do it. And whatever I told you to avoid it. Islam is so simple. فقد رجزهم عن ذلك وكان أولى خلق الله بالحجاج والجدال. So the Prophet moved them away from argumentation. But these people, if anyone were to argue on the face of the earth for truth, it should have been them, right? But the Prophet moved them away. gently push them away from argumentation. ثم إنهم رأوا رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قد بعث إلى كافة أهل الملل فلم يقعد معهم في مجلس مجادلة لإلزام وإفحام وتحقيق حجة ودفع السؤال وإلزام وإيراد إلزام. Then they noticed the Prophet Muhammad صلى الله عليه وسلم was sent to all people. He was sent to Jews, Christians, Muslims, and they noticed the Prophet Muhammad صلى الله عليه وسلم, he wasn't sitting with Jews and Christians debating them. There was one incident in the 9th year of Hijrah where Christians from Najran, because before this the Prophet had sent letters to kings and nobles all across the world inviting them to the Islam. So many groups from across the peninsula and different lands had heard about Islam, and one group, the Christians from an area called Najran, they came to the Prophet Muhammad to debate the nature of Jesus. They believed that Jesus was God incarnate of some sort. And then the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said this is not correct. So they wanted to debate him. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ invited them to mubahala. Anybody know what that is? Mubahala. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ invited them to sit with him, and they would all pray. And they would ask Allah to curse the liar. Right? ندعو أبناءنا وأبناءكم ونساءنا ونساءكم وأنفسنا وأنفسكم ثم نبتهل فنجعل لعنة الله على الكاذبين. Let us invite our wives, our children, our family, and sit and invoke the curse of God on whoever is lying about the nature of Jesus. Right? And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he came out and he brought Fatima. And he brought Ali, and he brought Hassan, and he brought Hussein. And the Najrani Christians, they saw this, and they got scared. And they went back and said, actually, we don't want to, let's not do this. Let's not do this, right? And the verse I just mentioned came in the Quran. And then they agreed to pay a jizya tax. Those Najrani, they agreed to pay a jizya tax, but not convert to Islam. So that was one of the rare incidents in which the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ sat down in a debate-like setting, right? But he never debated, you see. One time he'll just recite the Quran. Another time he'll invoke the blessing or curse of Allah, right? But no one could have debated better than him, right? And so he's gonna say that. So he says. فَمَا جَادَلَهُمْ إِلَّا بِتِلَاوَةِ الْقُرْآنِ. So the Prophet Muhammad never debated people except with reciting the Quran, الْمُنَزَّلَ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَمْ يَزِدْ فِي الْمُجَادَلَةِ عَلَيْهِ لِأَنَّ ذَلِكَ يُشَوِّشُ الْقَلْبِ. Because all this argumentation tends to confuse the heart. وَيَسْتَخْرِجْ مِنْهَا الْإِشْكَالَاتِ وَالشُّبْهَةِ. And you start to bring out all these doubts and confusing matters when you get into debate, especially theologians, because this chapter originally started about theologians. And you know what happened with the Inquisition in the 9th century of Islam, of the Mu'tazilites, who killed, the Abbasid Mu'tazilites, killed many Muslims, just because they didn't believe about the nature of the Quran, what they believed. And they were so argumentative about it. The Caliph Ma'mun in the 9th century, he adopted Mu'tazilite thought, and he said everyone has to believe that the Quran is created. It's created. It's not the word of Allah. It's the created word of Allah. You can't say it's the word of Allah, because if you say it's the word of Allah, well, then that means the word of Allah must have been permanent and always there, but that means that's the word of Allah is also infinite, but that means that only something that's infinite can be God, but that means that there's two gods. You see how they just confuse themselves. So they said no one can say that the Quran is the word of Allah. You must say that the Quran is created. It's another creation of Allah. And anyone who didn't pick up this view amongst the noble class and the scholar, they were killed. And it stopped about 20 years later with the Caliph Mutawakkil because of the stance that Ahmad ibn Hanbal took against this. But this is what the yushawwish al-qulub, all these argumentative things, it tends to confuse people, and it brings up things that no one ever talked about before, the Sahaba never talked about before, and now people are confused, and it leads to this fitan, right? And so all these issues happen. And so he said, why? right? Why even get into that? You have something much more beautiful that you can just present to people, which is the Quran. ثُمَّ لَا يَقْدِرُ عَلَى مَحْوِهَا مِنْ قُلُوبِهِمْ. And then these people, these innovators, you'll never be able to take that out of their hearts, even with the best debate. وَمَا كَانَ يَعْجِزُ عَنْ مُجَادَلَتِهِمْ بِالتَّقْسِيمَاتِ وَدَقَائِقِ الْأَقْسِيَةِ وَأَنْ يُعَلِّمَ أَصْحَابَهُ كَيْفِيَّةِ الْجَدَلِ وَالْإِزَامِ. And this wasn't because the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ did not avoid debate because he didn't know how to debate necessarily, or he didn't know how to teach the Sahaba to debate. If he wanted to teach the Sahaba to debate, he could have done that, right? It's not because of incapacity, right? Rather, وَلَكِنَّ الْأَكْيَسْ وَأَهْلُ الْحَزَمْ لَمْ يَغْتَرُّوا بِهَذَا. The true intelligent person, remember this is the book on deception, is not deceived by the uselessness of debate. Okay? So he would say, وَلَيْسَ عَلَيْنَا فِي الْمُجَادَلَةِ أَكْثَرُ مِمَّا كَانَ عَلَى الصَّحَابَةِ مَعَ الْيُهُودِ وَالنَّصَارَى. We don't have to get into debate any more than the Sahaba did with the Jews and Christians of their time, right? Some is okay to establish the correct point of view, right? And to remove doubts from Muslims, right? And to show the superiority of the beliefs of Islam over ideologies, yeah. But to spend your whole life, right, just in the debate scene, it's وَمَا ضَيَّعُوا الْعُمْرِ. And they never wasted their life بِتَحْرِيرِ مُجَادَلَاتِهِمْ, with debating all these people. فَمَا لَنَا نُضِيعُ الْعُمْرِ وَلَا نُصَرِّفُ إِلَى مَا يَنْفَعُنَا فِي يَوْمِ فَقْرِنَا. So why should we waste our lives? Why not spend our lives in what is beneficial for the day in which we meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? وَلَمْ نَخُذْ فِيمَا لَا نَأْمَنُ عَلَى أَنفُسِنَا الْخَطَأَ فِي تَفَاصِيلِهِ. And why would we get into something which we can't guarantee for ourselves that we won't fall into some kind of mistakes therein? Because once you get into nuanced debates about the nature of God, and that's really what he's focused on in this, you're likely to get into some mistake, right? So he says, and it's almost finished, ثُمَّ نَرَى أَنَّ الْمُبْتَدَعَ لَيْسَ يَتْرُكْ بِدْعَتَهُ بِجِدَالِهِ بَلْ يَزِيدُهُ تَعَصُّبُ الْخُصُومَ تَشَدُّدًا فِي بِدْعَتِهِ. Whenever you debate with an innovator, even if you look like you're about to win, you're only going to make them, like that guy in the story wearing the coat, you're only going to want to make them hold on to their bid'ah even more. Because the fact that they felt like they're about to lose makes them even more proud and arrogant, and it makes it even harder for them to let go, right? فَاشْتِغَالِي بِمُخَاصَمَةِ نَفْسِي وَمُجَادَلَتِهَا وَمُجَاهَدَتِهَا لِتَتْرُكَ الدُّنْيَا لِلْآخِرَةِ أَوْلَى. So Imam Ghazali says, for me, I'd rather debate myself. But he doesn't mean debate myself. He said, I'd rather go to war with myself. And I'd rather sort of spend time arguing with myself. Why'd I waste my time doing it? So that I can learn to give up this life for the next life. And actually, in Kitab al-Muhasaba, in Ihya al-Muddin, Imam Ghazali has a process of 6 steps to self-improvement, and it sort of begins with this. The first step is musharaka. You sit down with yourself and you set goals and conditions for yourself. This is what I'm going to allow myself to do today, and this is what I'm not going to allow myself to do today, in ways that improve yourself. After musharaka, you do muraqabah. Throughout the day, you watch yourself. Muraqabah is kind of like, when you watch National Geographic or something, the eagle sitting on the top of the mountain, and you see the little fish swimming, and it goes down. And that vision, that's muraqabah. That's how you should watch your nafs all day, right? And then after muraqabah, you do muhasabah. Take yourself into account. Why did I do this? I shouldn't have done this. I could have done better here. After muhasabah, okay, you do mu'aqabah. If there was something you came up short with, you do some kind of self-discipline. Every time that I lose my temper, I'm going to give $15 to charity. Mu'aqabah, some self-discipline. After mu'aqabah, you do mujahada. You do this over and over, and you struggle with it because you're not going to do it right the first time. You're going to keep failing, so you keep doing it over and over again. And after mujahada, you do mu'ataba. At the very end of it, you find something to blame yourself for and criticize yourself for, so you don't get proud and arrogant that you went through some self-improvement. Ghazali's like, I would rather do that with myself than try to put that onto someone else and argue with someone else, right? And spend my time arguing with them. هذا, he says this, Ghazali says this about himself. لو كنت لم أنهى عن الجدل وخصومة. I would do this even if the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ did not prohibit argumentation, right? فكيف وقد نهيت عنه. But he did. How much more should I avoid it now that he prohibited it? وكيف أدعو إلى السنة بترك السنة. And how is it that I should call people to sunnah by violating another sunnah, which is to avoid argumentation, right? فالأولى أن أتفقد نفسي. First, you got to check yourself. I would rather first check myself, right? وأنظر من صفاتها ما يبغضه الله تعالى وما يحبه لأنتزه عما يبغضه وأتمسك بما يحبه. So I can see what characteristics about myself Allah loves and which characteristics about myself Allah dislikes, and I can change those things that He dislikes and keep those things that He loves. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us a better understanding of this. اللهم بما قرأنا وجعلنا من الذين يستمعون القول فيتبعون أحسنه. If there's anything good I have said, that is by the grace of Allah. And anything wrong that I've said, that's from my own nafs. Barakallahu fikum. So we can pause here. The next section is غرور من اشتغل بالوعظ والتذكير, the self-deception or delusion of people who spend all their time giving talks. Oh boy. and reminding people. Wa'adh is like, when you give a talk and stuff. And so it's a delusion of speakers. Yes. Like 6 steps to self-improvement. Musharaka. Musharaka, which means to negotiate. And he said, you sit down and you negotiate with yourself. Kind of like setting goals. Okay, here is the limits I'm going to allow myself to watch TV today. Right? And so that's like, you're negotiating that with yourself. That's like internal musharaka. Yeah.
You gave us a sneak peek into, inshallah, what we're going to cover in the, inshallah, the next 10 chapters. Inshallah.
Yeah, inshallah.
Do you know which book it is? I'm going to look it up real quick.
So the last volume is Rubbul Munjiyat. And I don't know if it's Ajaibul Qalb. I'm not sure.
But this is the process.
What is the next book? It's in Kitab Muhasaba. Yeah. We'll find it, inshallah. Yeah. But inshallah, there will be someone better than me next time to, yeah. Metaphysics, I think I know a little, but maybe. What's the question? If you're saying part of a person's belief in God is subconscious, then, kind of what you're saying is from an epistemological point of view, a person's connection to God is fitri. That's another word for subconscious, which is fitra, which is a person's natural disposition, which is the way you incline towards things without even thinking about it. Actually, there's a guy, his name is Justin, Google this book. Just Google Born Believers. Who wrote Justin something? Born Believers. It's a very interesting book. It's written by a psychologist. He was interested in. He realized young children, even 4 or 5 years old, naturally believe in God, without anyone telling them? Justin Barrett, that's his name. Justin Barrett. And he's a psychologist, and he himself is agnostic. But he was like, this was interesting. So he wrote a book on it. He started doing all these experiments with kids to see if, is this your subconscious? Or is this how do you know? Like he would ask them, who made that? You know? Or he would put something in a box of crackers, and then no one could see it. And he says, who knows what's in there? And they would say, God. You know, or something like that. You know, he would give them like different options, you know. And so mama doesn't know, dada doesn't know, God knows. Yeah, God knows. You know, stuff like that. And so he wrote a book on this, and he said it is intuitive, 100% intuitive to children to believe in God. And then in the book, he said, when I started writing my papers, a bunch of Muslims emailed me. And they said, oh, we have a hadith from the Prophet Muhammad that says every child is born on fitrah. You know the hadith, كُلُّ مَوْلُودٍ يُولَدُ عَلَى فِطْرَةٍ. Every child is born on fitrah, which is a natural, you could say, unconscious disposition to do what is right and believe in God. You know? And he was like, you got to look into this hadith. And he brought that into his book, and he says, yeah, but, you know, I can't bias anything here in the book. Anyway, it's interesting. Look into that. It'll supplement your questions. I have to put a toddler to bed, so I apologize. I gotta get going. But next week, I think someone else will be doing the halaqah, inshallah. But I'll let them know where we left off so they pick up right here, inshallah. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us tawfiq, to not be people of deception. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to not let the deceiver deceive us, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said, وَلَا يَغُرَّنَّكُمْ بِاللَّهِ الْغَرُورِ. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to show us things the way they really are. Allahumma arina al-ashya kama hi, wal asr, inna al-insana lafi khusr, illa alladhina amanu wa amilu as-salihat, wa tawasaw bil haqq, wa tawasaw bis sabr. Wa jazakum Allah khairan, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.